Imagine this, a man born in a tiny Soviet village, raised by a single mother who milked cows for a living, bullied for being fatherless, climbs from directing a struggling state farm to ruling an entire country with an iron fist for over 3 decades. He's called Europe's last dictator. His name is Alexander Lukashenko. How did a seemingly ordinary Soviet everyman become Belarus' unbreakable strongman? Today, we are diving deep into his incredible, controversial journey. Born on 30th August 1954, in the small settlement of Kopis in the Vitebsk region of the Belarusian Soviet Socialist Republic, Alexander Grigorievich Lukashenko entered the world under humble and challenging circumstances. His mother, Yekaterina Trofimovna Lukashenko, worked tough unskilled jobs as a milkmaid on a collective farm, at a flax factory, on construction sites, and even on the railway to support the family. Lukashenko grew up without a father, a fact that led to taunts and bullying from schoolmates in the village of Alexandria where he attended secondary school. These early hardships, far from breaking him, seemed to forge a resilient, determined character. He helped his mother around the homestead and on the farm from a young age, learning the value of hard work and responsibility. As a boy, he was active in sports and music, but life was far from easy in the post-war Soviet countryside. Lukashenko later attended the Mogilev Pedagogical Institute, graduating in 1975 with a degree in history and teaching. He would later earn a second diploma in economics from the Belarusian Agricultural Academy in 1985. These educational steps were crucial, but it was his experiences in the real world of Soviet labor and military service that shaped the man who would one day lead the nation. After graduation, Lukashenko's path took him into mandatory military service. He served in the Soviet border troops from 1975 to 1977 as a political instructor in Brest. Later, from 1980 to 1982, he served in the Soviet Army as a deputy political officer in a Guards motor rifle division near Minsk, eventually reaching the rank of lieutenant colonel in the reserves. He joined the Communist Party of the Soviet Union in 1979. These years instilled in him a deep respect for order, discipline, and the structures of Soviet power, values he would carry throughout his political life. Returning to civilian life, Lukashenko worked his way up through various roles in the Soviet system. He served as a Komsomol secretary, an instructor in local party organizations, deputy chairman of a collective farm, and even held positions at a construction materials factory. By 1987, at age 33, he was appointed director of the Gorodets State Farm in the Shklov district of the Mogilev region. This was a pivotal role. The farm was reportedly struggling, but under Lukashenko's leadership, he introduced innovative leasing contracts, one of the first in the region, and worked hands-on to improve operations. He gained a reputation as a tough, no-nonsense manager who got results through discipline and direct involvement. This period as a collective farm director is often highlighted as the foundation of his image as a man of the people, someone who understood rural life and Soviet-style production. The late 1980s and early 1990s brought massive upheaval as the Soviet Union began to crumble. Lukashenko entered politics in 1990, elected as a deputy to the Supreme Soviet of the Belarusian SSR. He stood out as a vocal critic of corruption, positioning himself as an anti-establishment figure even within the communist system. He created a faction called Communists for Democracy and was notably the only deputy to vote against the dissolution of the Soviet Union in December 1991. As the USSR collapsed and Belarus gained independence, Economic chaos, hyperinflation, and uncertainty gripped the new nation. Many longed for the stability of the Soviet era. Lukashenko's big break came in 1993 when he was appointed head of the Parliamentary Anti-Corruption Commission. He aggressively targeted high-level officials, accusing dozens, including the Supreme Soviet Chairman and the Prime Minister, of embezzlement and abuse of power. While many charges didn't fully stick, the scandals forced resignations and elevated Lukashenko's profile as a crusader against the elite. This populist stance resonated deeply in a country suffering through post-Soviet transition pains. By 1994, Belarus had adopted a new constitution creating the office of president. Lukashenko ran as an independent on a populist platform, promising to fight corruption, restore order, and integrate closely with Russia. He campaigned against the chaos of early market reforms, vowing to protect ordinary people. In the first round, he secured about 45% of the vote. In the runoff against Prime Minister Vyacheslav Kabych, he won a landslide with over 80%, an election widely regarded by observers as the country's first and only genuinely competitive and relatively fair presidential vote. At just 39 years old, the former farm director was now president of Belarus. Once in power, Lukashenko moved quickly to consolidate authority and deliver on his promises of stability. He halted rapid privatization and shock therapy reforms, keeping key industries under state control. Supporters argue this shielded Belarus from the worst oligarchic chaos and economic collapses seen in other post-Soviet states. He maintained Soviet-era symbols through a 1995 referendum adopting a modified Soviet flag and coat of arms, making Russian an official language alongside Belarusian, and pushing economic integration with Russia. Another 1996 referendum dramatically expanded presidential powers, allowing him to dissolve parliament and extending his term. These moves centralized control but sparked protests, like the Minsk Spring demonstrations. Throughout the late 1990s and to 2000s, Lukashenko won re-election repeatedly, 2001, 2006, 2010, 2015, with official tallies often exceeding 75 to 80%. Each victory was accompanied by allegations of fraud, media suppression, and opposition crackdowns from Western observers. He built a welfare-oriented state with heavy subsidies, price controls, and social spending, earning loyalty from many rural and older voters who remembered the Soviet safety net. Belarus avoided deep recessions for years, and living standards improved in some metrics compared to the chaotic 90s. He cultivated an image as Batka, father of the nation, through folksy, direct speeches, frequent public appearances, and hands-on governance, even involving himself in ice hockey and farming. But his rule has always been marked by deep controversies and authoritarian tactics. Critics point to the suppression of dissent, disappearances of opposition figures in the late 1990s, harassment of independent media, and control over the judiciary and security services. Term limits were removed via referendum in 2004. International isolation grew, with sanctions from the EU and US over human rights and election issues. Lukashenko balanced relations with Russia, forming the Union state. While occasionally pivoting westward for economic relief, like turning to the IMF during crisis. Tensions with Moscow flared at times, such as the 2009 milk war over trade and recognition of breakaway regions. The peak of controversy came in 2020. After a presidential election where official results gave Lukashenko around 80%, massive protests erupted, fueled by claims of widespread fraud. Opposition candidate Svetlana Tsikhanouskaya, who stepped in after her husband's arrest, galvanized huge crowds. The response was a brutal crackdown, thousands arrested, reports of torture, internet blackouts, and forced exiles. Many Western countries refused to recognize him as the legitimate winner. Yet, with Russian support and loyal security forces, he weathered the storm. Constitutional changes followed in 2022, and he has continued to win subsequent elections, including in 2025, which opponents called sham processes. His involvement in regional events, like hosting Minsk agreements for Ukraine and handling the 2023 Wagner mutiny aftermath, showed his enduring role as a survivor. Today, after more than 30 years in power, Alexander Lukashenko's legacy is profoundly polarizing. To supporters, he is the guarantor of stability, sovereignty, and social welfare in a turbulent region, a leader who kept Belarus independent yet closely allied with Russia, avoided the worst of post-Soviet plunder, and maintained a strong state. Factories kept running, pensions were paid, and order prevailed where others descended into chaos. To critics, he embodies authoritarianism, stifled democracy, economic stagnation due to lack of reforms, and isolation that has left Belarus heavily dependent on Russia, especially amid global sanctions and geopolitical tensions. What lessons does his story offer? From a taxi, no. From a collective farm director's office to the presidential palace, Lukashenko shows how charisma, timing, and appealing to nostalgia for stability can propel someone to power in uncertain times. It illustrates the enduring appeal of strongman rule in societies valuing security over rapid change, but also the risks. Concentrated power can breed corruption, repression, and fragility when challenged. In a world of shifting alliances and economic pressures, his endurance highlights how personal rule, state control, and geopolitical positioning can sustain a regime far longer than many predicted. Whether viewed as a defender of his people or a dictator clinging to power, Lukashenko's journey from humble Soviet roots to Europe's longest-serving leader remains one of the most remarkable and divisive political stories of our era. What do you think? Stability at all costs, or is change inevitable? Let us know in the comments, and thanks for watching this deep dive.